This is Paul Jones. He's a professor at the University of North Carolina and the instigator and overseer of what started as Sunsite and is now ibiblio.org, which is, among other things, a huge repository of Linux distributions, not only current, but historic. And it's like ibiblio is like a giant library. In fact, Paul is one of the people, Professor Jones is speaking, well, let's not be formal. I always call him Paul. But is one of the people who first saw the potential of the internet as giant, unbelievable library. And that's not shocking. He's a professor of, among other things, library science. So here he is. And we're going to talk today about something in which he is a serious expert, and that is the influence of free and open source software mentality and style on the rest of the world. Professor Jones, talk to us.
Okay, well, I think what I'd like to say is there are two ways that this sort of idea about open source came into the culture, and the sort of values that we talk about, the values of sharing, of participation, of open exchange of ideas, and a kind of different attitude about ownership. And why I want to say that there are two ways is there are ways that these ideas converted people, and there are ways that we, arguing for open source and free software, looked back and found other examples that were already there. We already knew that you have to be able to read the law to follow it. We already knew that lawyers can't wait to have their briefs copied by the judge. We already know that these ideas of exchange and support happen informally in, say, custom car groups, in extreme sports, even in construction. And that once we kind of got this discovery that it wasn't just us, and it was a selling point for FOSS and open source to say it's not all that weird. And in fact, the tension always between free and open was the free people saying this is a revolutionary movement that's really going to change the world and has a strong moral basis, and the open people saying it's just practical, it just makes sense, it's just how people want to work, it's just how things happen. Don't worry about this political stuff. Pay no attention to the man behind the curtain. That doesn't mean that the personalities promoting both ends, Richard Stallman famously for free software and Eric Raymond for open source, represent those very well. Each of them has their own impelling personality, but the message of this is a revolutionary resistance to something that's gone bad, and this is just how people like to work, and it works in a very good way, are really that tension between open source and free as labels. And both of them kind of work in different places. So when it's hot to be revolutionary, you get a lot of people saying, we're like free software, we're like this. And then we talk about projects that, in fact, are revolutionary and do change things. Wikipedia is one prime example of this. But going back before Wikipedia, Project Gutenberg, which is probably the oldest non-software, unless you count language as free software, is that Hart started, and now Greg Newby runs, and we're the primary host for Project Gutenberg, which I'll get to why that makes a difference that you do not know. So this is good. We're the reference site for Project Gutenberg, and it's copied places all over the world. And Gutenberg, if you think about it, is a lot of people getting together, typing in stuff to share with other people. This started before the web, and in fact, our first conversations when we were working with them in the early 90s was, let's take your ASCII text and put it in HTML. And we got this note back that said, ASCII is forever, HTML is transient. It's just a fad. So as you know, that's all changed now, but it's about participation. It's about taking out of copyright material that can no longer be exploited and sharing it. It's about collaborative editing, and it's about satellite sites, other places. And if you look at that, that's a whole lot like what's happened with Linux and free software projects pre-GitHub, say. Now, why you didn't know what's going on is in the beginning, you might have known because you had to know to get to Project Gutenberg.
Okay.
But it's like there's a heroic period of engineering in the world for infrastructure, say bridge building, in which whole poems, Art Crane writing about the bridge, the construction of the Brooklyn Bridge, for example. Heroic engineers created this thing, and then it becomes infrastructure. You kind of just expect it to be there. It should just work. There's nothing magic about it. It's just part of everyday life. And I think that's another thing that we've seen happen with free and open source software, but we've seen it particularly happen with iBiblio, in that when we work well, we're invisible, and we don't have to say, it works, it's there, the support happens, it's understood, and I don't want to say that it's taken for granted, because the good part is it's integrated into your life in such a way. The way you go, I would like to find out about something, I will go to the library. You don't go, oh my God, I hope somebody builds a library in my hometown. You just expect there to be a library in your hometown.
Yes.
So other projects that you've seen, and I've mentioned Wikipedia in there, which is a changing, really aggregating human knowledge in a way that encyclopedias had done in the past, but on an entirely different financial model. And there are others that are, we've seen, staying with the language kind of thing. There are varieties of free dictionaries and so forth. But, everyone's favorite, because it's quirky, because it's often wrong, and because it's obscene, is Urban Dictionary, for example. And that's another a case of something that's taken the good and the bad part of the popular voice and exposed it in a great way to let people sort of aggregate a kind of slang, a kind of way of talking that might have been underground or hidden before in the past, that might have just been passed orally, but now it's like an explosion, so that a kid in Hyderabad and a kid in Düsseldorf can share a kind of obscene, quirky in-joke that lets them communicate across time. And this kind of thing, this kind of language that had a local exclusiveness, is worldwide in that way. And Urban Dictionary, whether we laugh about it or shocked by it, or, meh about it, when we would get meh about it, is when it succeeded. That it becomes something real out there. The other thing where FOSS has had a big influence is sharing varieties of patterns and prints. So you have businesses like Threadless, in which people are contributing designs for T-shirts, and the T-shirts are made and sold. The atoms are sold, the ideas are shared, voted on, and some profits shared. Spoonflower does the same thing for crafters and fabrics. So, and that started by, Spoonflower is started by two guys that didn't know anything about fabrics, but they knew that they had been in two different open source plays, originally in a software play, and then they had been at Lulu, which is a self-publishing seen through the lens of free and open source software. Then they left Lulu and were looking for something to do, and their wives were both doing work on Etsy. And everybody on Etsy was going, this would be so nice if I could have my own unique fabric design, and these fabric stores don't have what I really want. And so Spoonflower lets this sort of sharing, again, with an open source tilt. The founders of Spoonflower didn't really understand Fabric all that much in the beginning. Now they're very good at it, but they did understand open source community sharing, collaborative exchange, and they saw that even within the shops of Etsy, where people would say, "How do you do this? How do you learn how to do it?" So that's another big free and open source play. Lulu, I mentioned also, but I think possibly the largest sort of opening of open source to show that it's something real, so that it's something that can go beyond software, it was the founding of Creative Commons. Creative Commons took all intellectual property, our concepts of how it had to work, and sort of turned it on its head. That said, let's give the author the set of tools that will allow her to share her work wherever under some fairly simple, easy to understand rules. And let's start with text, but let's expand into other fields like music. And I'd say the text part has been the most successful. So one of the things that's changed people's lives perhaps more indirectly than directly is open access publishing by academics. You don't see this directly in your life. It's an infrastructure issue again. People that are really creating change, that are really looking ahead, that are really doing new discoveries in all areas of academic research. So that means public health, that means science, that means humanities, that means the professions, are with open access able to get peer-reviewed, top-quality research globally. So while Urban Dictionary makes the popular culture shared, open access makes an intellectual and research culture be shared. And the arguments around that are pretty much the same arguments that we had in software, the same arguments that we had in Creative Commons. And now what we see is when news reports come out, they'll say published in an open access journal or published by the Public Library of Science from PLOS or PLOS 2. And you begin to see this again. It now becomes invisible so that you just accept it. At first, it's like very exciting. Oh, you might have an article that says, oh, here it is. Open source or open access is breaking through. The Public Library of Science is being cited. And now, of course, yeah, it is. You expect it to be. So that's one part of it. And then now what we're saying is that how you can kickstart a small home industry where a lot of people need a lot of information. So you have things like Thingiverse, which is sharing 3D printing. So you can share all this, and then you can upsell, because if you have a very high quality 3D printer, you can make an object that other people want. You can display it, and people can make rougher cuts with their cheaper printer, or people who just know something and think it's kind of cool might purchase your small thing, your smaller, higher quality thing, and buy it there, and that kind of thing. But, in some ways, without the purchasing part, we've had this idea of sharing among makers and builders.
Yes.
From the beginning. It's been there often where groups get together and swap from the homebrew computing, in which Wozniak and Jobs showed up with the Apple, so to kids playing with Legos. Once you could get on the internet, you could make Lego miniatures and share with your friends things that were made out of 6 pieces, maybe of very small Lego pieces. Or you could do large ones. So Lego, in its own way, has captured large, complex things that they sell you. But other people make their own and share them wherever and make their own modifications. So we see that idea of recreation, remixing, as Larry Lessig liked to call it, remix culture. He's trying to touch on the music scene. but we also see it even in a way that going back in, say, folk music, in which
Yes.
you have one tune and various, many different varieties of lyrics on it. A guitar player might know one set of passing chords, and he might turn it into a murder ballad, or he might turn it into a newsy kind of thing, or a political thing, or a love thing, or a sea chanty, in which these songs get changed. One of the most famous ones that we know from way back is a song that almost everybody knows, Streets of Laredo,
Yes.
which was originally a sailing song.
Yes.
It didn't have anything to do with cowboys or...
Shenandoah, too.
Yeah, exactly.
And I know, oh my God, I've got to know 30 verses to Hesitation Blues
Absolutely.
and 20 to Plastic Jesus, which tells you what a lowbrow I am. But
Or Staggerlee.
Staggerlee is another one. Boy, there's
Staggerlee is
versions.
a great one.
I know 3 or 4 chord patterns for that one.
Right, or John Henry.
Another one.
Another one. So you see, when I tell you this, it's all had to do with free and open source there. People remade them. People changed the lyrics. People forgot the lyrics and added them. People borrowed the lyrics from this song and plopped it into this song.
Army marching cadences. There's people who study them and have collected them, and I would be one of them, except other people are doing such a great job. But they are something that is true folk music. Nobody knows who wrote this one or that one, and they, which I think is like almost the definition of true folk. You don't know who wrote it because so many people have had a finger in that pie, and the Army marching cadence, and then your unit might have a specific one.
Mm-hmm.
You know, they'll change.
Exactly. This is what Roger McGuinn talks about when he talks about the folk process. And so he's had, speaking of a Biblio site, for 20 years, Roger has uploaded a different American folk song every month. So now we're at almost 250 songs. And they're all free for download. They're all, his performance is protected. It's non-commercial license, which
Right.
sets it to keep it free in that way. But you change the names, you change the location, you change different parts of it, so that "Bury Me Not on the Lone Prairie" becomes it comes from "Bury Me Not on the Lonesome Sea."
Okay.
Where songs are carried over and over and over, or even further back, a song about a prostitute, Greensleeves, becomes a Christian song. What child is this?
Good Night, Irene. Thinking of songs about prostitutes. Good Night, Irene is one.
I'll get you in my dreams. So that's always been a weird.
Saturday night I got married. Me and my wife settled down. Yeah, that's a drug song too. A lot of drug songs.
Some of them become that. Some of them start that way, as far as we know, and some of them become that, as far as we know. So you really, that's again about this process of openness, of sharing, of innovation, and personalizing that use so that people have access to do it. A lot of the things that hold innovation back are that people may not have the knowledge, the access, or the community to help them move forward. The community provides sort of that knowledge infrastructure so that you fail less and succeed more quickly.
Now, wait a minute. Here's the thing, too. We started out talking about the influence of free and open source software on the greater culture, or lesser culture, depending. And now suddenly we're talking about things that long predate free software. As folk music is older, marching cadences.
Right.
I mean, my joke in the Army was that some of these marching cadences, I thought they started with the Mesopotamian army. They go back about the bad food. Those guys said the same stuff as they clonked along in their sandals.
Oh, yeah.
No change. Nothing changes. The sergeant's still a bastard.
Don't forget when I started, I said there are two ways in which FOSS has been influential. And one is rediscovery that it was there all along.
Yes.
And that's not something to sneeze at, because when you created a copyright or patent culture that is overly strong, there's a place for both of them, but when it's overly strong, you forget that these other things came through a large open sharing process. So we started rediscovering folk music, law, user groups of whatever, car fancier meetups
Yes.
in the real world, carpenters that apprentice to one place to learn something, to use it somewhere else, and then to learn back and forth. A few people at a pub at night talking about some sort of information exchange, some sort of repair they're having to do, something about where the best prices are at the market. Those kind of things existed, but the lens through which we saw them, as copyright law became extended, as patent law became extended, as Bayh-Dole was imposed on the universities, was that the only way to move things forward is that somebody owns it, and that somebody must sell, and that somebody must control it. And otherwise it's just like too chaotic. You can't have a free dictionary, or you'll end up with Urban Dictionary, which we actually like. But those battling discussions were there. So we had to go back and rediscover and say, it's been there long, let's pay attention to this. And then we have to see it applied to the future in new ways. So again, open access publishing is really a recovery of exchange of ideas that are out there. Creative Commons is really letting the law be used to do the kind of exchange that we had before. Free software is really a way to do that kind of thing, but a sort of Lulu, Spoonflower, Threadless, Thingiverse for new areas that the internet has enabled and that are built on free and open source principles. Another one that we might not have really thought about, that in fact we would have thought exactly the opposite, is encryption and security. Encryption and security were almost always about hiding things.
Well, that's what they're for.
Well, that's true, but think of Tor, for example. People can understand Tor, but people cannot easily crack Tor. Think about Bitcoin for financial exchange. People can understand it, but people can't really crack it, and it takes an infrastructure of a certain amount of information sharing for those things to happen. So cryptocurrencies and cryptography and network dark nets of obscurity, most of those are built on something with open source principles for the infrastructure to contain things that we want to keep secret. That's so counter to the earlier ideas of cryptography, that it's mind-blowing. But, I mean, if you want to look at the Tor source code, you can. If you want to understand how Bitcoin works, you can. If you want to understand the Diffie-Hellman algorithm, it's published. So an impact that never actually occurred to us was you can use free and open source principles in cryptography, in security, and it can create a structure that's actually quite useful.